we are joining today to hear about some cool stuff going on in the world of listening. So those of you who've attended a book club session hosted by us before will understand the format. We meet with an author and kind of dig into the themes of the books and try to sort of think about how those themes can relate to our practice as educationalists or as leaders in education and beyond. So yeah, really excited to have all of you here today. We've got Hull, we've got Halifax, we've got Colchester, we've got London. Doesn't seem to be anyone from the west of the country with us today. If there is anybody here from the Midlands or further west, do give us a shout so we can spread out a little bit further. But yeah, lovely to have you all here. And today we are going to be talking about leading the listening organisation. This is the book cover. We found this book because it relates really closely to our work that we do at Edurio. We are we're built around the premise of listening to your people and the benefits of listening to your people. And my colleague Amanta, who's on the line today, has spent a lot of time this year digging into what it means to listen to your people. And I believe the origin story of this is pretty much Amanta Googled the term listening organisations as it was something that we'd thought about, and up popped this book. We read the book and we thought, this is all of our thinking already neatly wrapped up in a sort of 200 page paperback. So yeah, we got in touch with Kevin, who is one of the three authors of the book, and we've chatted a little bit in the lead up to this, and yeah, really thrilled to be able to chat to Kevin today. So that's enough preamble, but yeah, Kevin, lovely to have you with us. Do you want to give a little intro to who you are and what led you to leading the listening organisation?
Well, thanks, Iona, and lovely to see you all. Great to see such interest in this topic. So, yeah, it's quite a long story actually, but I'll try to keep it sort of brief. I mean, my background is in internal communication, well, PR broadly before that. And I worked all of my career actually for British Telecommunications, which became BT. And I started to get into internal communication when I was given a job to lead up a new internal comms team in a group inside BT's global division, going back to 1999 when that happened. It was quite an unusual thing. Internal communication was sort of a new thing. So it's great. I loved it, and I fell in love with internal communication from that point on, really. Um, Most of the time back then, we were just talking about communicating at employees. And then I got a job in BT, which was in its IT division. As you know, BT is a huge company. Its IT division alone had about 20,000 employees. And we started to go through a major transformation of that part of BT. And I was involved with the internal comms, and I started to think, well, we really ought to be listening to employees about what they think and feel about this proposed change. And I just really, off my own bat, to be honest, just set up a whole series of leadership listening events, which went on for about 18 months. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just making it up. There was no book really for me to go on. But essentially, I just asked leaders to go and talk to groups of employees in small numbers with no agenda. And I made them listen to employees for at least 20 minutes before they really started saying anything, which was quite a shock to them, to be honest. But, you know, it really was great fun. And actually, most of them really enjoyed the experience. So I sort of grew it from that's really where my interest in listening started. This is going back 20 years, and I sort of paid sort of bit of interest in it, and then I started to get really interested in it when I did my PhD, which is all about the way internal communication is associated with organizational engagement, the way employees engage with the organization. And that really highlighted more than ever the importance of listening. It was actually more important to listen and respond appropriately than it was to actually tell employees about what was going on. Don't get me wrong, they're all strongly correlated with engagement, but the listening piece was more strongly associated with engagement. And that was a bit of a surprise result. My PhD was finished in 2016. And then after that, I published a couple of papers. And then I got together with Mike and Howard, and we started, my co-authors for the book, and we started to do some work on listening about 6 or 7 years ago. And it was about a 4 or 5 year project where we spent our time talking to internal communication managers and organizational leaders about their perceptions of listening. And we published a report every year for about 4 years. And then the book was the culmination of all of that research, published, I think, 2 years ago now. So that's the journey. That's where my interest in listening has come from. And yeah, a little bit about me. So I should explain. My day job is I'm a co-director of PR Academy. We are the Chartered Institute of Public Relations' largest teaching centre. So we teach professional public relations qualifications. So this is people working in PR taking their professional qualifications. But my role really is to teach the internal communication courses that we deliver for PR Academy.
Lovely. So one thing, this is relatively early on in the book, so I'll give you a little spoiler and then to whet your appetite and then you can read the rest of it. I It knocked my socks off reading that it was 2009 when the British government first commissioned a review into the impact on employee engagement and outcomes for the organization. And I think it's for me, I did a management degree and it was around that sort of time that I was at uni. But when I read that the other day, I just thought that is crazy. Like iPhones existed in the world before we thought, shall we see whether or not engaged employees have an impact on the sort of outcomes of the financial outcomes, the kind of achieving goals and achieving the mission of the organization. It just blew my mind how new this is as a concept.
I mean, that report, for some of you, I think I can see you nodding and probably remember it. It's the McLeod and Clark Engaging for Success report, which was, back in 2009, the government of the time in the UK thought it needed to address a productivity problem. Um, Seems still to be something that comes up on government agendas, but back then it was David Cameron who commissioned the report, and Nita Clark and David McLeod did this research, and it's best remembered for their four enablers of employee engagement, one of which is employee voice. Um, so yeah, I mean, I mean, employee voice though has been around. I have to say, they didn't discover employee voice in 2009. It's been around, goes back to the 80s, really more associated with trade unions in the 70s and 80s, but it's sort of grown. And by the way, we deliberately chose not to use the term employee voice in the book. It was a conscious decision to move away from that term. And the reason for that is because if you think about it, employee voice is putting the emphasis on employees to say something. Whereas if you talk about leadership listening, it's putting the emphasis on leaders listening. It's maybe a subtle point, but it's a really important one, I think.
Yeah, I think it is really, really important. And in the book, which we'll dig in the themes in a minute, but it's sort of you're moving the dial from making it be the responsibility of the person with the opinion to the person who wants to make the change, and going from sort of the voice to the hearing and then to the understanding and then to the taking action. And I think that sort of journey is the further along we can go along that, I think the better. So yeah, let's take this opportunity to dig into the kind of big themes of the book. Do you want to give us your kind of your overview?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a accumulation of 4 years of research. That's surveys, focus groups, workshops, interviews that we conducted over that 4 year period. But it's also heavily based on academic research that's been published in the last 20 years as well. So it brings that all together in one place. One of them, might get onto this later, really, is that one of the things we found quite often is that when we talk to people about what they thought listening to employees was all about, oftentimes people start by talking about leadership capabilities. Yeah, so, and I can come on to these because we do explore what the capabilities are for good listening, but immediately people seem to think, well, they think of a certain leader or senior leader in their organization, and they've got an example of a good leadership approach, and usually many examples of quite poor leadership listening approaches, which they then tell you. But no one really was saying we need to have processes of listening. So you kind of jump to this point about leadership listening being about leaders being good listeners. And don't get me wrong, that's really important. But what we really discovered was that it's not enough just to have a leadership team who are good listeners. That's good, but it will only get you so far. What you really also have to have is systems and processes of listening that are embedded right across the organization. So it's those two things come together that really generate the benefits. And I think that's probably for me, the overriding message in the book. You can't just leave it to individual leaders to hopefully, be good leaders, good listeners, and then expect to get all the benefits that you get from it. You have to have systems and processes in place as well. And so for me, a leadership responsibility for listening is not only learning how to be a good listener yourself, but you have to take responsibility for instilling listening processes and drive that forward, because honestly, they probably won't get set up unless senior leaders actually really make sure that they do get set up. So that's the big message, I think.
Yeah, and I think so obviously, well, not obviously, some people who have joined this might not know what we do at Edurio, but yeah, we are a survey company, and one of our main focuses is around staff feedback. And we've sort of stayed in our kind of the thing that people buy from us is always a survey, and it's access to surveying. And that is kind of, I know you talk in the book about that being sort of the main one. People sort of, it can start and end at surveying, but there is the sort of much larger sort of range of ways of listening, and kind of, yeah, different ways you can instill those processes and those practices. Maybe it's a good idea to give a bit of an overview of the kind of the different types of voice and listening exercises that exist, and some ideas about how to start putting those puzzle pieces together into one of these sort of structures that your book lays out as so important.
Yeah, of course, we always start with a survey. And it's interesting, actually. There's some of the reactions. I remember at the book launch, we we had someone from a company that does employee engagement surveys, and they'd read the book, and their sort of reaction was that we as authors were against surveys in some kind of way. And of course, it's interesting because we're not, but we do critique surveys within the book. We point out shortcomings and advantages, but that's what we would do with all of the methods. So, to be absolutely clear, we do firmly believe that employee surveys are fundamental. And we would probably always start with some kind of survey, absolutely. But, just to rely on a survey only, which we did find, talking to many people, that there are a large number of organizations that do only rely on one annual survey to tick the listening box, and when of course that is really quite problematic. But to answer the question, I think we identified 16 different what we call methods of listening to employees in the book. So there are many. But to sort of just talk about the obvious ones, they are well, say they're called focus groups. I don't really like the term focus groups for listening to employees, but that's the language we tend to use that's understood. But essentially, is what I was talking about earlier: getting small groups of employees together with no real agenda set for the discussion, having leaders attend those, and just listen to what employees are thinking and feeling. So I personally am a strong advocate for having no agenda for those. And that's what I did when I was at BT. And I think it really surfaces some interesting stuff. But they equally, you could go in and run a series of, call them focus groups, call them listening sessions on that basis with a specific topic, and that also is beneficial, of course. But there are a couple of things about that. I mean, for me, when I did this, I made sure that none of the employees who were invited were from the same team. So, and of course, make sure that none of the employees in these sessions are present, with a manager, their manager. So no managers of people present to be involved. And the reason for that is because if you attend a session like this with another employee in your same team, you may be conscious or worried about saying something that that person who you work with may think is a bit silly or a bit strange. And the same goes for say, you would be reticent to say something in that setting if your manager was there because you might not be sure about how your manager may or may not take what you're saying. So that for me is the way I ran them. The senior leader that I brought in would just introduce themselves briefly for 5 minutes and then under my direct gaze would not interact at all until everyone in the room had been able to go around and talk about things that they wanted to express. And then what I would do at that point was I would just collate. I would say, well, three or four of you have mentioned this topic. Let's talk about this. And then the senior leader's role is to sort of discuss that topic. But again, it requires quite strong coaching to the senior leader not to be defensive, not to go and answer it and say, oh, yeah, it's a good idea, but, we could do that, but we tried it before, it didn't work. That kind of defensive reaction has to be coached out. I mean, so the idea would be to say that, the leader would say, that's really interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about that? So you really delve into the topic without seeming as though you're cutting the conversation down, because employers are very, understandably very reticent often, even in these sort of safe scenarios, about saying something that they think might be taken the wrong way. Um, so, and of course, the first time that the leader present responds, if they sort of appear dismissive, it completely kills the whole process, because after then, no one's really going to say anything. So it takes quite a lot of coaching to do that. But that I love those sort of that method. Um,
Mm.
so that I would certainly do alongside a survey and pulse surveys as well. Sorry, Aaron, you want to come?
Yeah. I think the dismissive part, but also being too quick to even if you have the answer, sort of, or if you think you have the answer, sort of someone brings up a challenge and you're like, oh no, that's fine because we've got da 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 da, and actually, even though that's sort of productive and it's got a positive intent, it can still have the same effect of kind of, oh, never mind, it's already in hand, so I don't need to worry about it, sort of thing.
Completely. I mean, I did run a session once where one employee was really quite angry about something, and dominated the discussion for a good sort of 10 minutes or so, and was really getting quite worked up about it. Understandably, I hate the idea that there are difficult employees in these scenarios. In my experience, I've never come across a difficult employee. I've just come across employees who feel very passionately about something or very disappointed about something. So, allowing that discussion. But by the same token, I had to make sure that that single issue wasn't going to dominate the whole session. So it's takes quite careful facilitation. And I was quite lucky because the leader in that group was a really really good leader, and he said to this person, look, I can really see that you're really quite angry about this. Why don't you come and have a chat with me next week in my office one on one? And that really, I mean, it said to that person, you know, I care about what you're saying, but B, it said to the rest of the group that the leader was genuine
Yeah.
and would really, take up their point. So, a lot of time when I started doing this, I had a few leaders who were very reticent. I was lucky because the chief executive mandated the board to go out and do it. They all had to. But of course, that has its problems because some of them were doing it very reluctantly. Um, and, so in the end, I had a couple of quite, you know, not so good experiences with one or two leaders who clearly didn't want to be, doing this. And one I remember, when I was sort of saying just do a 5 minute introduction, this person did about a 20-minute introduction and ate into the time. So the
Yeah.
game plan was to cut down any conversation. And, that didn't go well. So after that, to be quite frank with everyone here, I ended up, really just focusing on the senior leaders who were open to this process and were willing to work with me on it. It was a waste of everyone's time, trying to get someone to do it who didn't want to do it. And to be frank with you all here, I think, this is the reality of listening. Um, I wanted to mention a couple of other methods which people really don't always completely understand. So one of the key findings from our research is, and this surprised me, but employees are actually more comfortable expressing things on digital forums than in any other setting that you provide for them. Now, this was counterintuitive to me because you kind of hear the reticence of people putting stuff on digital forums internally. Okay, they may be quite open about putting stuff on external social media forums, but internally, again, the same thing applies. You're worried about writing something that everyone can see, but they are actually more comfortable. But it's the method that's least used to listen to employees. Now, I don't mean, monitor employees. I mean, learn from the things that they are saying openly on digital forums. And that's the least used method for listening to employees, yet it appears to be the one that employees find the easiest and that more comfortable to use.
And I guess that's the most organic as well, because if I'm going to write something in my public, whether it's a Teams sort of space or whatever the internal comms tool is, I've chosen to do no one's I'm not responding to a survey. I'm not answering a question. I've had a thought and now I'm sharing it. Maybe I'm part of a conversation, but if you sort of someone says, "Oh, has anyone mentioned? Does anyone have a resource for this thing?" And suddenly there's six people saying, "Oh no, but I would really like one." That's a signal. Or if there's kind of people, yeah, the sort of, "Oh, have you seen this thing? This looks really interesting. Have you seen?" And you start sort of finding those themes, then you can see the sort of groundswell around particular ideas or challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, now it's so much easier to just do the analysis of all of that. Yeah, you just use Copilot, and it can summarize some of the issues and themes that people are talking about for you. I mean, I remember talking to someone a couple of years ago about this, and they worked in a large organization, and I said to this person, how are you managing to analyze all the discussions? And she said it's a real problem, because they had a internal digital platform that was getting literally hundreds of comments and posts a week, and they couldn't keep on top of it. But of course now, with AI and Copilot, especially, because most people use Copilot within Teams, then you've got the ability to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really exciting. I think it sort of democratizes it more. You run the risk of it becoming harder to sort of find the signal in the noise, but also if we weren't doing that at all before, then it's still going to be an improvement on where we are now. So yeah, it's nice. I want to zoom out a bit because you talked about in the focus groups and that sort of sense that the leaders who weren't open to listening to their people, and there's probably also going to be an element of um, you have to make yourself a bit vulnerable if you're opening up the floor to any kind of questions, concerns, criticisms, ideas, that sort of sense that, oh, but I'm the leader, so I'm the one who needs to sort of set the direction. I need to make sure that everyone feels like they're in good hands and all of that stuff. How do you break down um those kind of barriers or kind of, yeah, mental blockers around being kind of fully open to hearing these things?
I think this is a really big question, to be honest. I'll give you a couple of examples, but before I do that, I wanted to just really um, highlight one of the big conclusions we came to through this work, which is it's a big issue, literally because of the complexity of it. But what we found really was that internal communication managers were expressing loud and clear to us in large numbers that they had significant challenges in just the point that you've raised there, explaining to senior leaders about the reason for bothering to do this stuff was a big challenge. And then, even when you get past that hurdle, secondly, explaining and coaching senior leaders in the sort of approach to listening that's really required. And these are big challenges, and kind of like I don't want to get too sort of philosophical here, but you kind of think to yourself, how have we got to the point now where senior leaders in organizations do not immediately understand the benefits of listening to employees? Because if I'm frank, the research on this is overwhelming. The academic research, it's extensive. Time and time and time again, academic research shows that senior leaders, in particular, listening to employees generates multiple benefits for organizations. And by the way, for employees too. But it's both. The organization benefits and so do employees. And I just did a quick, we asked someone to help us with some analysis of this, a lady in Canada, and she went away and she did some research of the top 25 MBA programs in the world, ranked by quality of program, and the top 25 executive leadership programs in the world, sort of things you might, be familiar with, long weekends or weeks away for leaders. And her analysis of the syllabi for all of those programs revealed that there was hardly any, if at all, any mention of listening to employees within them. If it was mentioned in passing within a communication module, and that communication module was heavily emphasizing what you might call persuasion or communication techniques. So, in my view, I mean, this is maybe going off on a bit of a tangent, but just kind of think to yourself, how have we got to this point where we have to try and convince senior leaders about the value of listening? The reason is because senior leaders are not being taught this in MBAs or executive leadership programs. And so this makes the task of an internal communication manager or an HR manager or whoever it may be, convincing or persuading, if you want, or influencing senior leaders to do more listening really tough. Because the senior leaders thinking, well, I didn't get taught this on my MBA, or this doesn't feel right. So that's the first challenge. But to answer your actual question, which is really about the capabilities, I think, then I think it's, in my experience, I was, in the end, I was choosing leaders to work with that I kind of thought would really probably open to at least hearing me. And then I was pushing the boat out and I did some small sort of listening exercises to get them into the experience. So, for example, there was a senior leader at a place called Martlesham, which was in BT. Martlesham is BT's IT university, if you like. It's like a university campus. About 3 or 4 thousand people work at Martlesham, all doing research and development. And the senior leader I was working with had, as in addition to their kind of functional role, they had ownership of managing this site. So simple thing, you won't find it, earth-shattering, but I started to get Phil to do coffee, breakfast, bacon roll and coffee mornings, just like 1 hour in the restaurant every month, and just people to just come and have a chat with him. And that's how I got him into the listening process. And like, you sort of intimated, I think, Iona, first of all, he wanted to be fully briefed. you know, the week before, he's like, what's going on? What sort of things am I going to expect? We've launched this new sort of strategy or whatever. Oh, I'm not sure how I'm going to answer that. And I remember distinctly the first time we did this, one of the most important questions he got asked was someone came up to him and said, Phil, you really need to help me. And I said, okay. He said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, the the showers in our block, in our office, haven't worked for over a week. They had their own showers and everything. So Phil, oh, thanks for raising that. Have you reported it to facilities management? Well, no. I thought I'd mention it to you today. So this is great, right? Because then Phil turns to me afterwards and says, Kev, can you get the shower fixed? So, right, okay, I get the shower fixed. And the next one, this person's really happy. But on the way back after that, Phil saying, why didn't anyone ask me about the latest strategy, and all this kind of stuff. But the truth is, they were just testing him out, right? And as you went on and did more, they got into more meaningful discussions because they realized they could trust him and he wasn't trying to, do anything silly with them.
Mm,
It's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's just choosing the right leaders who are at least open, working with them, coaching them, guiding them, supporting them, helping them, and they become more confident in the process and actually start enjoying it,
mm.
and see the value of it from that. That's really my experience, but I'm sure there are many others of doing it.
And some of that is almost by stealth, isn't it? They're sort of the having those the bacon rolls and stuff. And I think there's um we work with mostly with people in the education sector, mostly in England. And I think there's a sort of certainly there'll be a cohort of leaders within the sector who feel that it's important that they're visible. So they'll go to us, they'll make sure they've kind of gone to a school and they've wandered around and people can see them. And it's about sort of showing that they are available, showing that sort of breaking down that sort of sense of barrier. But actually, if you can make it sort of really relaxed and really sort of a casual setting where this is just an opportunity to chat, and then maybe you can start sort of ideas can coalesce around a particular thing, and being in the room, but being in the room as a sort of equal rather than I've come in to sort of walk the corridors and show you that I'm here, or something like that.
Exactly, and I have to say, employees have really low expectations of leadership listening, and I don't mean that in a disingenuous way. What I mean by that is they don't expect to see a senior leader and then voice something that they think needs to be addressed, and then expect the next day or week for that to be done. Right? They're not doing it. Some people may, but in general, what I found was employees really all they really wanted was the opportunity to express something that's on their mind to someone who is in a position to maybe even sort of think about it.
Mm,
But there is a caveat to that because if nothing is said, if there's no response to that, that is then disengaging. So, but what I'm trying to say is the employees do not expect to say something and then see it happen. They expect the senior leader to think about it, treat it seriously, and then, of course, not everyone would expect an individual response at some point later. But when you've got a process going, you can report back to employees and say, look, we've been out and talked to various people over the last month. These are the sorts of things that you've been raising. And these are the things that we're going to be, doing or can do. Some of these points require more thought and consideration, but rest assured, we are taking them seriously. So the response mechanism is really fundamental to that. But what I'm
yeah.
saying is just visibility and small groups, leaders just being human, not talking corporate jargon, just talking and chatting and showing an interest in what people are doing. That's really what most employees, but that's really all they expect.
Mm. So yeah, you've worked with lots of organizations across lots of sectors, across lots of countries. Um, how are we doing as a as a as a society? Where are we on the sort of spectrum from completely eyes closed, hands over ears to completely open and taking everything on board?
It's patchy, if is my honest response to that. There are some organizations that are really embracing this and getting and doing it well. There are others who are nowhere near off the drawing board. Most organizations are what we would call passive level of listening to employees, which really is that maybe there's an annual employee engagement survey, for example, maybe there's a few pulse surveys, maybe there's the occasional sort of listening session, but it's not really done with massive, kind of intent. it's just done almost from the perspective of just monitoring, keeping an eye on things. That's where most organizations are. In terms, there is research which regularly monitors employee satisfaction with employee voice. Um, and that has, that's gradually improved over the last 20 years or so. But I mean, I forget the exact figure, but I think it's something around 55, 56% of employees will say they're satisfied with opportunities, which of course is the basic level. If you then ask them how satisfied they are with the way leaders respond or managers respond, that drops to sort of 45%. And if you ask them how satisfied they are with being involved in, what goes on, well, that drops again to more like 35%. And that's pretty, those results haven't changed an awful lot, but they are nudging up a little bit in general, right? But within that general result level, there are massive differences. Some will score really high, organizations will score really highly, and some will score even more low than those numbers.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, in our so we collected feedback from around 80,000 school staff last year in England, and it's around a third. Our question is, how often do you see that your feedback to the leadership has impact? So it is the sort of the further end of that spectrum. It is like feedback into action. And yeah, around a third say that it regularly has an impact, and yeah, much less. I think it's another third, or maybe it might be a quarter actually, that think it rarely or never has any impact. So yeah, it looks like those numbers kind of match up a little bit.
it does. That's interesting data. I mean, so the survey data that I'm talking about is uh, with employees, generally speaking, but comes from various sources. So, for example, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development used to do surveys on this. So, but it's interesting you have similar results from such a large, number of employees.
Yeah. Cool. So we've established that we're it's patchy, but it could be there's room for improvement. What would be your advice for if we say we're sort of in, yeah, we're sort of maybe at a C grade as a society in listening. How do we go up to sort of A's and B's and yeah, embed that much further in the organization?
It's a big question, and I think to me it comes back to ownership and responsibility. Who owns the responsibility to listen to employees inside an organization? It's not always clear. I've been banging on about this for 20 years because I firmly believe it should be owned by the internal communication team. But there are many people who would, disagree with me on that.
And
And
there'll also be many organizations that don't have an internal communications team because they're smaller.
absolutely,
Yeah.
for sure, or they only have one person
Yeah.
and that person is already overloaded with just sending stuff out. So it's not easy, but you know, it obviously it starts with the senior leadership team. They have to want to do it, believe in it, and support it. So without that, you're really not going to get very far. So that comes back to what I was saying earlier about education of senior leaders so that they understand the value of it. And that's not going to change overnight. But that does need to be addressed, for sure. But apart from that, I would then say either HR or the internal communication team, or both working together, really need to prioritize this. So, I talk to internal communication managers all the time. That's what I do. I, and I ask them quite often how much of your work is based on communicating at employees, sending stuff out, all the rest of it, organising events where people are told stuff, compared to how much of your time and resources spent on listening. I would struggle to get beyond more than 20% of time being spent on listening. And that's fine. I understand that. But, I'm not sort of saying 50-50, but shifting that balance more sort of 60-40 would be where I would be going. That does mean stopping some of the stuff that internal comms people currently do. They're always very, very busy, but some of the stuff they do is not really going to help an organization achieve its objectives, perform, increase engagement. and so on. Whereas if they stop doing some of the, what I call SOS, sending out stuff, and spent a little bit more time doing listening, that would have a big impact on employee engagement levels. And by the way, it would improve employee well-being too.
Yeah, there's something in the book which I'm about to misquote, so apologies. But so one of the things that really landed with me was about if people are seeing a survey or a listening exercise as the thing that's going to give you the answer, they're missing a trick. It should be seeing it as the sort of the beginning of the dialogue, or so,
Yeah,
there's a quote that's something like that. Yeah,
yeah. It's a survey is not a diagnostic tool. A survey is a start of the conversation, and it gives employees the opportunity to express things anonymously. Although a lot of people don't trust surveys, so that you have to prove the trust in the survey, and the only way to do that is by acting on it. That creates trust. People often say to me, why don't more people do surveys? The response rate is only 20% or whatever it is. And I said, well, 20% is not too bad actually, but if you want to get it up, that's good because it reduces the margin of error in your results. But, and they say to me, why don't more people do it? And I said, well, the main reason why response rates are often low is because employees don't see the point of doing it. They don't see any action or any response. And I'm sorry if this shocks anyone, but I do talk to internal comms managers who tell me that they've been told by their senior leaders to leave some of the results out of the reports that they produce after a survey because those results don't look good. And I'm not talking about isolated incidents here. This is quite regular. This is shocking. So this is an insight into you know some of the issues that we need to or we have to address. So
and
sorry.
I think in those instances that is that sense of it being the answer because they found they found an answer that they don't like, and they're sort of, well, let's hide that now. This is a permanent state. The sort of the rating has been given to us. We've received this rating. We don't like it. Let's hide it, rather than, oh, we found that here is our big opportunity for improvement. We need to go and find out more about that, and then we can work
Yeah.
on that and improve it. Yeah.
I mean, when I worked at BT, this is going back, a fair while, so things may well have changed. But the part of BT I was working in, the managing director was more interested in getting a higher response rate for his part of the division than his counterpart, his other managing directors. He wanted to get it to 65% because Joe Bloggs in the other part of the business had got 63%, and I had to explain, that's not really the objective. He was putting more time into getting the response rate up than he was putting into actually responding to the results. So this is but I want to stress, I do firmly believe in surveys. They really are good and useful. And I'm really honestly not just saying that. They would be a fundamental plank of anything I was implementing, but it goes in hand with transparency about reporting and demonstrating action, of course.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I think we see, and we've had seen the sort of competition on the response rate, and there is something in that that I think is good because it is it's a signal that we're investing in the survey process. But as you say, if you could direct some of that energy into the post survey stuff, I think that's smart. One of the other things that we struggle with, I think, when thinking about building a listening program uh, in within our organizations is the sense that it's going to take a lot of time. And I think there are ways, and as we've said, like the big annual survey is, it can feel quite high stakes if it is the only listening exercise that you're going to do. You want to make sure you've done a really good job. You want to make sure you've captured as many voices as possible, and so on. Is there a way to sort of lower the stakes of it and get it more habitual and more kind of to a point where every day you're listening? And yes, you will do a large scale survey at a point throughout the year, but within that time and between those times, you're kind of, yeah, always doing smaller little bits of listening that help add up to a bigger whole.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of pulse surveys. But by what I mean by that is not only are they shorter than an annual survey, but they segment employee groups. So you don't want to be, doing a pulse survey to the same group of employees necessarily every month because, you know, employees will say they're getting too many. But there's good statistical reasons for segmenting groups on a regular basis, and that's certainly what I would be doing. But then I'd be supplementing it with monthly analysis of digital forum discussions, monthly leadership listening sessions. That would be my 101 for listening. One annual employee survey, which is quite lengthy, maybe 20, 30 minutes even. Regular monthly pulse surveys, which only take 5 or 10 minutes, but segmented to different employee groups. Regular monthly leadership listening sessions, which again bring in different people, and then constant reporting on digital forum discussions. That would be, you have a monthly report then, which you give to the board, and the board then has to look at it and provide a response. So it becomes a cyclical process
Mm.
basis. I mean, that would give you a really good grounding. That moves you into passive to active listening. You can go deeper. You can do more than that if you want to get to the higher levels. But that shift from passive to active is where you're going to get a real lift in organizational engagement levels. The data is absolutely overwhelming. If you get that right, do it properly, which of course is a big if, but if you can do that well, you will certainly get a lift in engagement. And then, of course, all the massive benefits you get from high levels of organizational engagement, better resilience, better understanding and change management, better performance, for sure, all of those, no doubt, but more innovative ways of working. Also, well-being, reduced anxiety and stress. These are significant benefits for any organization.
Yeah, it's interesting in our staff survey, we ask around whether people have considered resigning recently, and if they have, we ask them what are the causes. And bear in mind, this is for staff in schools. The first one that has anything to do with sort of day-to-day school stuff is the fifth reason, which is pupil behaviour. All of the top four are about the top one is feeling undervalued. That's the key reason why people think about resigning. Overwhelming workload, lack of morale. There's another one which I can't remember, but it's all about your life as an employee and your relationship with leadership. And those are the main reasons why people are thinking about resigning. And so I think, yeah, the there is, as you say, the evidence there. I don't know if there is evidence that if there's been any studies that suggest otherwise that this that it's not worth doing or it's not a good idea. So yeah, one thing I want to make sure that there's time for questions at the end. So I'm going to sort of slightly shift shift gears slightly. We talked before about kind of using Copilot to analyze kind of trends in discussions on Teams and stuff. Where do you see the kind of world of listening going next? What's the next big sort of tech advancement for this?
Yeah, a good question. And I think, if I'm honest, it's predictive analysis of discussions on digital forums. AI is very good at thematic or sentiment analysis, you might want to call it. A lot using, analyzing large amounts of data. But I can see this getting into predictive. So highlighting issues as they are being talked about at a very early stage and stopping issues becoming escalating to full-blown crises. That's, I think, a higher level of analysis. And the same goes for using AI for advanced levels of quantitative data analysis. So most survey data is analysed from a descriptive basis. 66% of people agree or disagree. I think that it won't be too long before AI can start doing correlations and multiple regression analysis, which at the moment is a realm of advanced statistical analytic tools, but they could soon be embedded into AI, and that really starts to show you then the linkages between changes in scores on a survey and the resultant impact that it has on an organisation. We're
Mm.
not there yet, I don't think, but it won't be too far away.
Yeah, and then almost linking, yeah, the sort of the with your financial data or with your kind of your retention data or some of your impact measures
Absolutely.
all in the same sort of pool. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. Yeah, lots I think to think about. I'm looking forward to, as I say, we've been on this journey for we've been doing stakeholder feedback for 10 years. Well, 11 years now at Edurio, but it's been the last year or so where we've sort of upped our thinking from uh, sort of thinking in terms of stakeholder feedback and asking the question and receiving the answer to really embedding this as a leadership practice. And I think, yeah, the stuff that you've worked on has been kind of really helpful and shaped our thinking. And some of our trusts that we work with, some of whom I think are already on the line, have been benefiting from your wisdom already. And it's nice to have you here to be able to kind of, yeah, get it straight from the horse's mouth. Whilst we've got a few minutes left, I want to open up the floor to questions or reflections. If there's anybody on the line who has, a question or anything where you've done some listening practices in your organisation, where you can share your wisdom, do put your hand up or add a comment in the chat if you're feeling a bit shy. I'm tempted to pick on someone who I had a nice chat about listening to yesterday.
I,
Yes,
d-
she's happy to
I
tell.
don't mind saying something.
It was you I was going to pick
Was
on.
it me? Were you going to pick on me? I can't even see if am I there? I can't even see myself. Hi, Iona.
Hello.
Well, this is very, very fascinating and very interesting. And I haven't read your book actually, Kevin, but I think I will definitely be purchasing it. So yeah, I have been an executive head, worked in a trust, and I'm now a leadership coach, and I do a lot of work around sort of the listening culture. And I think I put in the feedback there about actually the response. I totally agree with you about the response after feedback, I think is the most important thing. And what I've noticed from coaching leaders in schools is that there's a fear around one what they're going to receive in terms of the feedback, but also how to respond to it. I think there's like a bit of a lack of knowledge around how do you respond? And I think you sort of explained that really, really well. So thank you. The other thing that sort of cropped up in my mind is around psychological safety, and I just wondered what your thoughts were around that, because I absolutely agree about the systems and processes and the strategy. But for me, that culture of psychological safety seems really important. I just wondered what your views were on that.
Well, thanks for the feedback. Yeah, I think both points you made are really pertinent, about yeah, we talk about psychological safety from the point of view of employees feeling safe to speak out. But in the book and the research, we think there's another dimension to that, which is the psychological safety of leaders going into listening, because they're worried about things that might be said or how well they're going to be able to respond. So it works both ways, although I don't want to stretch that point too far because obviously the main issue is employee psychological safety. There's no easy answer to this.
No. I
None.
I think it's quite complex. It is complex in schools and trusts, and that's my background. I have done a bit of work in business as well, and seeing similar things where there's layers, and when there's maybe a trust and schools, and then you've got the middle managers, and then you've got the people on the ground. There's a lot of human interactions in a quite hierarchical structure in schools that really does make things a little bit more difficult in many ways when I've been doing some research and work in businesses that are a little bit more simply organized. So, yeah, I don't know what you may think about that comment.
I'll just, Kevin, before you come in, I'll just add a complicating factor, which is with trusts, you have that sort of hierarchy, but you also have a geographical split. So
Mm.
there's sort of the central trust. There might be a kind of, then there'll be a layer of leaders that are the school heads of different, at different locations. And then there's a hierarchy within that as well. So it's sort of, it goes sort of levels down and also levels outwards, which I think is an extra complicating factor.
Mm.
I think I mean, some of the research that I did for my PhD was based on in two public sector organisations, and one was a housing authority. I had five case study organisations, two private sector, two public, and I think, the levels of bureaucracy or the layers, of management levels, certainly very different. Well, not so much now, but they were, different. But I think, if I'm honest, my experience of psychological safety is it's more acute in public sector organisations than it is in private sector organisations. And I know that may sound like a sweeping generalisation, but I do think there's some data that suggests this is the case. And I don't know why that is, but it does make it more complicated. If there's more acute levels of psychological safety in a certain organisation, then it's a far difficult issue to tackle. I mean, the only real way, in my view, is to just do the legwork on a day in, day out basis. Where managers of all levels, middle line manager, senior leaders, are all behaving in a way that's conducive to good listening. And it's fundamental not to close conversations down, not to be dismissive, but more than that, not to be vindictive. And this does come up. Employees will say they're very worried because so and so has said something, and within the next period of time, something happened to them. This is not isolated. It's a big issue to change the culture and mindset of leaders and managers so that they become good listeners. It really is. It's a massive challenge. And I think the reason is, as I said before, no one is really teaching or training managers or leaders to do this on a large scale. So it's a big problem, I'm afraid. I can't give you an easy, quick answer. But I think that's why, for me, having systems and processes in place is a counterbalance to poor leadership listening. Sometimes leaders get forced to listen if systems and processes are in place. They cannot avoid it. And I know that's not the way to do it, right? Of course not. But you are starting to put leaders into positions where they have to look and respond to processes and systems and reports of what people are saying. That isn't the ideal way of getting them to do it, but it can fall. I've seen that happen where they suddenly become, they see they have to do something.
And I would imagine then you've been sort of forced into it, then you see the benefit, and then you get forced into it again, and then you see the benefit again, and then you think, oh, maybe I'll just keep going with this because it does seem to be and yeah, you sort of lead the horse to water, and then eventually you manage to see the benefits and have it kind of self-sustained. We're at the hour, so we have run out of time. I think everyone who's attended will send a follow-up email with a link to the book, so you can download it, but not download it, order it. You can download, maybe you can download it. Is it an ebook? You can purchase it, or you can access it online if that's available. But yeah, I just wanted to wrap up the session and say thank you ever so much, Kevin. I think this has been really, really valuable for me. I've learned stuff during this discussion that I can sort of add to my thinking around this, and yeah, have thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I hope it's been interesting. And yeah, if anyone wants to join, connect with me, that's the word, on LinkedIn, then do feel free to do that.
Wonderful.